This is the story of Gabriel Fernandez, a child whose only crime was being born into the wrong hands. A little boy who wanted nothing more than to be loved, but instead was tortured in ways too horrific to imagine. This isn't just another true crime story. This is a case that shook the nation. A case that made people ask, how? How could something this horrific happen? And more importantly, why didn't anyone stop it? 8-year-old Gabriel was not just abused. He was tortured, beaten, starved, locked away like an animal. He begged for help. His teachers reported the bruises. Strangers saw the fear in his eyes. Child Protective Services knocked on his door. And yet, he was left to die. Was it his mother's fault? Her boyfriend's? Or was it something deeper, something far more disturbing? Because when Gabriel took his last breath, it wasn't just his killers who failed him. It was the entire system. So I ask you, who is really responsible? Pearl Fernandez, the woman who gave birth to him only to become his executioner? Isoro Aguirre, the man who carried out the abuse with monstrous cruelty? Or the system that saw the warnings and ignored them? Because if we don't ask these questions, this will happen again. Before the horror. Before the pain. Before the unspeakable tragedy, there was just a boy. A little boy who loved to smile. A boy who found joy in the smallest things, like the way his grandfather's rough hands ruffled his hair or the warmth of his grandmother's arms when she held him close. Gabriel Fernandez was not born into darkness. He was not born into suffering. In the beginning, he was safe. He was happy. He was loved. He had this laugh, this kind of infectious giggle that made you want to laugh with him. He was the kind of child who could light up a room just by walking into it. The kind of child who saw the world with wide, curious eyes. A boy who loved deeply and trusted without question. His grandparents, Robert and Sandra Fernandez, raised him with warmth, with care, with love. They weren't wealthy. They didn't have much. But what they did have was something priceless, a home filled with kindness. Sandra remembers it all, the way he'd follow her around the kitchen, tugging at her apron, asking a million questions about what she was cooking. The way he'd climb onto Robert's lap at the end of the day, listening intently as his grandfather told him stories about the world. He was their pride. Their joy. Their everything. And then, in an instant, he was taken away. Not by death. Not by accident. But by a decision. A court order. A piece of paper that changed everything. You see, Gabriel's mother, Pearl Fernandez, was never a part of his life. She abandoned him as a newborn, leaving him in the care of relatives. She never looked back. She never asked about him. She never cared. Until one day, she did. But why? Why, after years of neglect, did she suddenly demand to have her son back? Was it guilt? A mother's regret? A change of heart? No. It was money. Government assistance. Welfare checks. A steady income, just for having him under her roof. That was all Gabriel was to her. A paycheck. The knock that changed everything. A social worker. A clipboard. A decision made by people who never truly saw him. Papers signed. Agreements made. And just like that, Gabriel was taken from the only home he ever knew. His grandparents fought. They pleaded. They told the system, no. Don't do this. He isn't safe with her. They knew. Deep down, they knew something was wrong. But the system didn't listen. It rarely does. And so, at 7 years old, Gabriel was placed in the custody of Pearl Fernandez and her boyfriend, Isoro Aguirre. Two people who did not love him. Two people who saw him as a burden. Two people who, in time, would become his worst nightmare. This was not a home. It was a prison. A place where love did not exist. A place where Gabriel would be seen not as a child, but as something disposable. He had no idea that he had just stepped into his own personal hell. Do you think some people are just born evil? Or does society create monsters? Let me know in the comments below. This is just the beginning. If you want to hear what happened next, make sure to subscribe. Gabriel's story isn't over yet, and neither is the fight for justice. It started the moment he walked through the door. This wasn't home. This wasn't family. This was something else entirely. Gabriel Fernandez, just 7 years old, stepped into a place that would become his prison. And his mother, the woman who had given birth to him, was no savior. She was something far worse. She had never wanted him. So why did she fight to take him back? Pearl didn't take Gabriel in because she loved him. She didn't take him in because she missed him. She took him in for one reason: money. Government assistance. Welfare checks. A child meant more cash in her pocket. That was all he was to her, a paycheck, a number on a piece of paper. And Isoro Aguirre? Her boyfriend? He didn't want Gabriel either. If anything, he hated him. From the moment Gabriel arrived, he was a target. Every breath he took, every step he made, it was like he was an inconvenience, an unwanted presence in their home. He was a little boy just trying to exist. But to them, that was too much. Pearl ignored him. Isoro resented him. And together, they made him suffer. The abuse started small. A slap. A shove. A cruel insult thrown carelessly in his direction. But quickly, it escalated. Gabriel was starved. Beaten. Tortured in ways no child should ever experience. His mother and her boyfriend treated him like he wasn't human. Like he didn't matter. There were nights when he wasn't given food. He'd sit there, hungry, stomach aching, while the rest of the family ate in front of him. And when he couldn't take it anymore, when his little body begged for something, anything to eat, he was punished for it. They made him eat cat litter. His own vomit. Things no one should ever be forced to swallow. And when he was sick from it, when his tiny body rejected the filth they made him consume, they hurt him even more. At night, while his siblings slept in their beds, Gabriel had no bed. No blanket. No pillow. His home was a cabinet. A small, dark compartment where he was locked away for hours. No light. No warmth. No comfort. Just a cold, cramped space, and the silence of his own suffering. They shoved a sock in his mouth so no one could hear him cry. And if that wasn't enough, they beat him. With belts. With batons. With anything they could grab. Each strike, each bruise, each wound, it was their way of reminding him that he wasn't welcome. That he was nothing to them. And yet, somehow, Gabriel still found the strength to go to school. He sat in class like every other child, but he wasn't like the others. His eyes carried something most kids didn't, a silent, desperate plea for help. And someone noticed. His teacher, Jennifer Garcia, saw the signs. The bruises. The weight loss. The quiet, withdrawn look in his eyes. She knew something wasn't right. One day, Gabriel came to school with patches of hair missing. When she asked him what happened, he told her something no teacher should ever have to hear. "My mom shot me in the face with a BB gun." And that was it. That was the moment Jennifer knew she had to act. She reported the abuse. She did exactly what she was supposed to do. She contacted Child Protective Services, begging them to investigate, to take action before it was too late. And CPS? They showed up. They walked through the doors of that apartment. They saw Gabriel. And then, they left. They left him there. They saw the bruises. They saw the conditions he was living in. They saw it all. And they did nothing. How many warning signs does it take? How many cries for help have to go unanswered before someone steps in? Gabriel had a teacher who fought for him. But the system didn't listen. And the price of their silence? A little boy's life. Who is to blame? The mother? The boyfriend? Or the very people who were supposed to protect him? Let me know in the comments below. This was just the beginning of Gabriel's suffering. But why didn't CPS remove him from that home? And why, despite so many red flags, was no one listening? Make sure to subscribe, because what happens next will leave you speechless. May 22nd, 2013. The night everything changed. It started like any other evening in that house, a place that should have been a home, but was nothing more than a prison for Gabriel Fernandez. For 8 months, he had endured suffering beyond imagination. The hunger. The beatings. The nights locked away in a cabinet, left to cry himself to sleep. The slurs. The degradation. The constant reminder that in his mother's eyes, he was worthless. But on this night, the cruelty reached its breaking point. Isara was angry. He was always angry when it came to Gabriel. He hated him, despised him, wanted to break him down until there was nothing left. And that night, whatever little strength Gabriel had left, it wasn't enough to protect him. The attack began with a punch. A single, powerful blow to the head. Gabriel stumbled, dazed, his tiny body barely able to withstand the force. But Isara wasn't finished. Not even close. He punched him again. And again. Harder each time, like he was trying to erase him from existence. Gabriel collapsed. Blood dripped from his nose, his mouth, staining the cold floor beneath him. But still, Isara didn't stop. He grabbed Gabriel and slammed him against the wall. The impact was brutal, his fragile skull crashing against the hard surface with a sickening crack. 7 years old. 7 years on this earth. And every single day, he had fought to survive. But how do you fight when the person meant to protect you is the one trying to destroy you? And where was Pearl? Where was the mother who was supposed to love him? Protect him? She was right there. Standing in the doorway. Watching. She saw her son being beaten to the brink of death. And she did nothing. Not a scream. Not a protest. Not even a flicker of concern. She let it happen. And when Gabriel finally stopped moving, when his tiny body lay motionless on the floor, barely clinging to life, only then did they panic. By the time the call was made, it was already too late. First responders arrived within minutes. They rushed into the apartment, expecting a simple fall, a minor accident. What they found was something else entirely. The moment they saw Gabriel, they knew this wasn't just a fall. This wasn't an accident. This was something much, much worse. His tiny body was broken. His face was swollen beyond recognition. His ribs, shattered. His skin covered in bruises, burns, open wounds. One paramedic later described it as the worst case of child abuse he had ever seen. A lifetime of suffering packed into one small, fragile frame. And yet, he was still alive. Barely. A 7-year-old child, clinging to life, despite everything he had endured. They worked fast. They lifted him gently, careful not to cause more damage, though it was impossible. His body was a battlefield of pain. But time was against them. His pulse was weak. His breathing, shallow. If they didn't move fast, he wouldn't make it. They rushed him to the hospital, praying they weren't too late. That somehow, despite everything, they could save him. Doctors fought desperately to undo the damage. To stop the bleeding. To ease the swelling in his brain. But what they found when they examined him was more than just the injuries from that night. It was a history of torment. Gabriel had broken ribs, injuries from weeks, maybe months before. He had cigarette burns on his skin. Scars from past wounds that had never been treated. His entire body told the story of a child who had been tortured, day after day, night after night. And through it all, Gabriel never spoke a word. He couldn't. He was in a coma. For 2 days, doctors did everything they could. Machines kept him alive. Hope hung in the air, fragile and thin. But deep down, they knew. There was no coming back from this. Gabriel had fought for so long. Longer than most would have been able to. But now, his little body couldn't fight anymore. On May 24, 2013, Gabriel Fernandez was pronounced dead. 7 years old. Gone. And just like that, it was over. 8 months of torture. A lifetime of pain. All leading to one final, brutal night. He was failed. By his mother. By her boyfriend. By the very system that was supposed to protect him. But now, there was one question left to answer. Would there be justice? Or would Gabriel's suffering be forgotten? Let me know in the comments, who do you blame the most? Pearl Fernandez? Isoro Aguirre? Or the system that let this happen? Justice was coming. But would it be enough? Make sure to subscribe, because in the next moments, we'll see the shocking trial that followed, and the verdict that left the world divided. Pearl Fernandez. The woman who gave birth to Gabriel Fernandez. The woman who was supposed to love him. Protect him. Keep him safe. Now, she sat in an interrogation room, under the harsh glare of fluorescent lights, being questioned about her son's murder. But if anyone expected remorse, they were sorely mistaken. Her voice was cold. Detached. Like she was describing something that had happened to a stranger, not her own flesh and blood. Over and over, detectives pushed. They laid out the evidence. The photos of Gabriel's broken body. The medical reports. The horror she had allowed. Still, she showed no reaction. No tears. No guilt. Nothing. She blamed Isaro. According to Pearl, it wasn't her. It was him. He was the one who beat Gabriel. He was the one who lost control. She was just there. Just a bystander. But the evidence told a different story. Pearl wasn't just there. She was an active participant. She starved Gabriel. She forced him to sleep in a tiny cabinet. She encouraged the abuse. She called him names. She laughed when he cried. And when Isaro hit him, when he tortured him, when he beat him into unconsciousness, she didn't just watch. She let it happen. Her own child, pleading for help, looking at her with desperate, terrified eyes, and she did nothing. Then, there was Isaro. The man who delivered the final, fatal blows. The man who shattered Gabriel's ribs, burned his skin, slammed his head into a wall, with enough force to end his life. His defense? He lost control. According to his defense attorney, my client did not intend to kill Gabriel Fernandez. Not intend to kill him? After months of beatings? After starving him? After forcing him to eat cat litter, locking him in a cabinet, humiliating him, treating him like he was nothing? It was an insult. A pathetic excuse for an unforgivable crime. But Isaro wasn't alone in that courtroom. There was another entity on trial. One that couldn't sit in the defendant's chair, but was just as guilty. The system. The very system designed to protect children like Gabriel. CPS. Social workers. The people who were supposed to step in when a child was in danger. Gabriel's teacher had reported the abuse multiple times. She had begged them to act. Other people had seen the bruises, the injuries, the fear in his eyes. And yet, nothing was done. In an unprecedented move, 4 social workers were charged with child abuse and falsifying records. They had ignored the signs. They had visited Gabriel's home and left without taking action. They had failed him. But were they really punished? The charges were later dropped. And once again, justice slipped through the cracks. Who do you blame the most? Pearl Fernandez, the mother who allowed this to happen? Isaro Aguirre, the man who inflicted the pain? Or the system, the one that should have saved Gabriel, but instead left him to die? If you were the judge, what sentence would you have given them? Let me know in the comments. This case shocked the world, but the real question remains, how many other children are suffering right now? Make sure to subscribe, because soon, we'll go inside the trial that changed everything, and reveal what really happened behind closed doors. After months of horror, after the truth of Gabriel's suffering was exposed for all to see, justice finally arrived. Or at least, that's what they wanted the public to believe. Pearl Fernandez. The mother who allowed the torture. The mother who laughed as her son begged for mercy. The mother who turned a blind eye until the very last moment. And Isaro Aguirre. The man who delivered the final, fatal blows. The man who broke Gabriel's ribs, burned his skin, and beat him until his tiny body could take no more. 2 people. 2 sentences. But was it enough? She didn't fight it. She didn't try to defend herself. She pleaded guilty. A simple, quiet surrender. But was it guilt? Or was it just a way to escape the death penalty? Pearl Fernandez was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. A fitting punishment? Maybe. Maybe not. Because while she would live out the rest of her days behind bars, she would never truly face the same suffering she inflicted on her own child. She would never know what it was like to be locked in a cabinet, to be starved, to be burned, to be beaten senseless. She would get 3 meals a day. A bed to sleep in. A prison cell, but still, a life. And many questioned, did she get off too easy? Isauro Aguirre. The man who carried out the worst of the abuse. The man who took pleasure in making Gabriel suffer. When his sentence was read, he showed no emotion. The judge did not hesitate. There would be no life sentence. No chance for parole. Isauro Aguirre was sentenced to death. Some called it justice. Others called it too little, too late. But what do you think? Did Pearl deserve the same fate? Outside, the public reaction was intense. Some felt relieved. Finally, after years of waiting, the people responsible for Gabriel's suffering would pay. But others weren't satisfied. Because for them, this wasn't just about 2 people. It was about a system that had failed over and over again. For social workers had been charged for their negligence, but in the end, those charges were dropped. No one in CPS, no one in law enforcement, no one in the government faced any real consequences for allowing this to happen. They ignored the signs. They ignored Gabriel's cries for help. They ignored the teacher who reported the abuse again and again. And Gabriel paid the price. But here's the real tragedy. Gabriel wasn't the first child the system failed. And he won't be the last. Even after this case, after the outrage, after the promises that this will never happen again, children are still suffering. CPS is still overwhelmed. Social workers are still missing warning signs. And abusive parents are still slipping through the cracks. So I ask you, was justice really served? Yes, Pearl and Isauro will never walk free again. But Gabriel isn't here. And every single day, another child is crying for help. Another child is being ignored. So tell me, what's really changed? Now, I turn the question to you. Do you think Pearl should have received the death penalty too? Was justice really served? Drop a comment below, and if you want to see more stories that uncover the truth, make sure to subscribe. Gabriel Fernandez. A name that should have never been associated with tragedy. A child who should still be here today. A little boy who wanted nothing more than to be loved. But love was the one thing he was denied. He wasn't just failed by his mother. He wasn't just failed by her boyfriend. He was failed by everyone who had the power to stop this, and didn't. So the question remains, could Gabriel have been saved? What if, just once, Pearl had decided to be a mother instead of a monster? What if Isauro had never entered their lives? What if he had been stopped before his hands ever touched Gabriel? What if CPS had acted when they were first warned? When the reports were made? When Gabriel's teacher spoke out? When his bruises were seen? What if, just one time, someone had refused to look the other way? Would Gabriel still be here? Would he be playing with his friends? Blowing out candles on his birthday cake? Would he be running into his grandparents' arms, safe, happy, alive? Or was his fate sealed the moment he was handed back to Pearl Fernandez? That's the hardest question of all. Because if Gabriel could have been saved, then this wasn't just a tragedy. It was an avoidable tragedy. A tragedy that should have never happened. And he's not the only one. Every single day, children are being abused. Every single day, CPS is missing warning signs. Every single day, teachers, neighbors, doctors, and family members are questioning whether or not they should say something. And every single day, some of those children don't make it. Gabriel's story is heartbreaking, but it is not unique. That is the most terrifying part. So what can we learn from this? First, we have to recognize the signs. Unexplained bruises. Sudden fearfulness. Extreme hunger. Wearing long sleeves in summer to cover injuries. Fear of going home. A child who flinches at sudden movements. A child who is withdrawn, or too quiet, or constantly apologizing for things they shouldn't be sorry for. And we have to listen. If a child speaks up, even if they hesitate, even if they seem unsure, we have to believe them. Gabriel's teacher saw the signs. She reported the abuse. But nothing changed. The system failed. But that doesn't mean we stop trying. If you suspect a child is in danger, don't ignore it. Don't second-guess yourself. Don't assume someone else will handle it. Call Child Protective Services. Call the police. Keep calling. Keep pushing. Because sometimes, one phone call is the difference between life and death. Gabriel's story should not be forgotten. He deserves justice, not just in the courtroom, but in the way we protect other children from suffering the same fate. We can't save Gabriel now. But maybe, just maybe, we can save the next child before it's too late. So tell me, what do you think is the biggest lesson from Gabriel's story? What could have changed? What should have been done differently? Let's discuss in the comments. Because the more we talk about this, the more awareness we spread. And the more awareness we spread, the better chance we have of preventing the next tragedy. If you found this story important, if you believe Gabriel's story deserves to be heard, share this video. Post it. Talk about it. Don't let it be forgotten. And if you want to hear more cases like this, stories that need to be told, stories that shake the world, then make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Because trust me, there are more stories. And some of them might be even worse than this one. Thank you for watching. And remember, sometimes, speaking up is the only way to save a life.